It was a chilly October morning in the small town of Pine Haven. At Maple Glen Cemetery, the air was filled with soft mist that clung to the ground like a blanket. 70-year-old Mr. Henry Blake stood quietly beside a fresh grave. His eyes were red, but no more tears came. The name on the simple gray stone read, Eleanor Grace Blake, loving wife and mother. Henry had been married to Eleanor for 43 years. They had shared a life full of laughter, hard work, and love. She had passed away just a few days ago after fighting cancer for a long time. Henry still couldn't believe she was gone. He wore his best suit, an old dark gray one that hung a bit loose on his thin frame. It was the same suit he had worn when he received a Special Army medal many years ago. On his coat, a small American flag pin shimmered faintly, a quiet reminder that Henry had once been a proud soldier. The cemetery was peaceful, surrounded by tall pine trees and soft hills. Henry had been standing there since morning, just talking to his wife. He told her stories, whispered old jokes, and remembered their life together, just the two of them and the moments no one else knew about. Henry had joined the Army when he was just 18. He served for 12 years and earned the rank of Staff Sergeant. He had saved lives in battle and was respected for his bravery. After a serious injury, he left the Army and worked in a furniture factory for over 30 years. Eleanor had been his rock. She helped him through the tough times, comforted him when the nightmares came, and stood by his side as they raised 2 children. Now those children lived far away, with busy lives of their own. When Eleanor got sick, Henry did everything for her, cooking, driving her to appointments, and sitting beside her hospital bed. He never complained, not even when their savings disappeared paying for medicine. Now, as he stood at her grave, it felt like his final duty. Soldiers never leave their partners behind, and Eleanor may not have worn a uniform, but she had marched beside him every step of the way. That's when trouble began. A young police officer named Kyle Mercer arrived at the cemetery. He was new to the job, only a few months in, and eager to prove himself. Someone had called the station and said there was a strange man in the cemetery after hours. Officer Mercer thought Henry might be a homeless man or someone trying to cause trouble. He walked over and told Henry that the cemetery was closed and he had to leave. But Henry explained softly that today had been his wife's funeral, and he just needed a few more minutes to say goodbye. But Mercer didn't really hear the pain in Henry's voice. He just saw someone breaking the rules. He called for backup and reported an uncooperative individual. Soon, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Henry, tired and overwhelmed with grief, sat down on a wooden bench. He wasn't trying to ignore the officer, he just needed to catch his breath. But the officers thought he was refusing to obey. They shouted at him to get up and put his hands behind his back. Henry, trained long ago to follow orders, slowly stood up, but his knees were weak and his hands shook. The officers thought he was stalling on purpose. Then one officer pulled out handcuffs, and just like that, a 70-year-old veteran, heartbroken and confused, was being arrested next to the grave of the woman he loved most in the world. That moment, quiet and unfair, would soon turn into something much bigger. Henry Blake stood still, not fighting, as the cold handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His old bones ached, and his heart felt even heavier. This wasn't how he thought today would end, not with flashing lights and police officers shouting at him, but with quiet prayers beside Eleanor's grave. He looked one last time at her headstone before the officers began walking him toward the patrol car. His legs wobbled as he stepped forward, and when he stumbled a little, the young officer, Kyle Mercer, thought he was trying to escape. "Stop resisting," Mercer shouted. Henry wasn't resisting. He was just tired from the pain, from the long day, from the emptiness that came after losing the person he loved most. The other officers grabbed him tighter. One even reached for his taser, just in case. Henry's mind raced with memories of Eleanor, of war, of being captured once long ago during a mission. That time, too, he had been taken away. helpless and afraid. Now, here he was again, feeling just as broken. Across the cemetery, a few people started noticing the commotion. Mrs. Patel, who ran the flower shop nearby, was walking past the gates when she saw what was happening. She squinted and gasped. "That's Mr. Blake," she said out loud. She remembered how Henry used to come in every Sunday to buy white roses, Eleanor's favorite. He always smiled and asked how her kids were doing. A kind man, always polite. She pulled out her phone and started calling neighbors. Henry Blake is being arrested at the cemetery, and it's right after his wife's funeral. Soon, more people began to arrive. Some stood quietly, confused. Others pulled out their phones to record. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A war veteran in handcuffs beside his wife's grave. One of the people Mrs. Patel called was Julian Torres, a young Marine who lived nearby. Julian had met Henry months earlier at the local community center, where Henry would sometimes share stories from the army. Julian looked up to him, not just as a soldier, but as a good man. When Julian heard the news, he felt something deep inside him. A fellow veteran needed help. Without wasting time, Julian put on his Marine dress uniform, the one with shiny buttons and polished shoes. He called some of his old friends who also lived nearby, men and women who had served with him. "Henry Blake needs us," he said simply. They all knew what that meant. In the military, you don't leave a brother behind. Meanwhile, back at the cemetery, Officer Mercer was still trying to control the situation. Henry tried again to speak. "My wife. I just wanted to talk to her. Just a little longer." But Mercer didn't listen. He thought Henry was making excuses. The officer grew more nervous. He didn't want to look weak in front of the growing crowd, so he did something terrible. He pulled out his taser and used it. Electricity surged through Henry's body. He cried out and fell to the ground, shaking. People watching screamed in shock. This wasn't a man fighting back. This was a heartbroken husband being hurt for no reason. And just then, from the gates of the cemetery, 7 Marines walked in, side by side, dressed in full uniform. Their shoes tapped on the pavement in perfect rhythm. They didn't yell, they didn't run, but their presence was powerful. Everyone could feel it. Julian Torres led the way, his face calm but serious. When Officer Mercer looked up and saw them, he froze. These weren't random people. These were soldiers, and they had come for one of their own. Julian Torres and the 6 other Marines walked straight toward Officer Mercer. They didn't push or yell. They didn't need to. Their sharp uniforms, quiet strength, and the way they moved together said everything. Julian stepped forward and spoke calmly. "Sir, what's going on here? That man is Henry Blake. He's a veteran. He just buried his wife today." Mercer looked unsure for the first time. His voice wasn't as firm now. He was trespassing. After hours. He refused to leave. Julian interrupted, still calm. "Do you have proof he didn't have permission to be here? Because I know Henry. Today was his wife's funeral. He's not a criminal." Mercer didn't know what to say. People were recording with their phones. The crowd at the gate had grown larger. More veterans had shown up, including a retired Army nurse, an old Navy officer, and a group of local firefighters who respected Henry as a neighbor. Julian turned to the officers still standing over Henry. "We'll take care of him now. Let him go." One officer bent down and removed the handcuffs. Julian knelt beside Henry and gently helped him sit up. Henry's hands were shaking, and his face was pale, but he gave Julian a small, grateful nod. "You came," he whispered. "Of course," Julian said softly. "You never stand alone." The other Marines stood around Henry, forming a protective circle. They didn't need to say a word. Everyone watching understood what was happening. These soldiers were standing for honor, for respect, and for one of their own. Soon, more people arrived. The cemetery manager came rushing in. "What's going on here?" she asked. Someone explained what had happened. The manager's face went pale. "Mr. Blake had permission to be here all day," she said firmly. "I signed the papers myself. He wasn't trespassing." Mercer's heart sank. He had made a huge mistake. Then his supervisor showed up, a serious-looking captain named Riley. He looked at the crowd, the Marines, and then at Henry Blake still sitting on the ground. After hearing everything, Captain Riley turned to Mercer. "You tasered a 70-year-old veteran, after his wife's funeral, without checking permission, without talking to the staff?" Mercer couldn't speak. He looked down at his shoes. "We'll talk later," Captain Riley said. "Right now, fix this." Julian helped Henry stand up slowly. The crowd clapped quietly. Some people had tears in their eyes. Henry turned to look at his wife's grave one more time. His voice was stronger now. "Sorry, Ellie," he said. "I didn't mean for all this to happen. I just wanted to be with you a little longer." Julian and the other Marines stayed beside him while he finished his goodbye. No one rushed him now. No one interrupted. It was quiet again, the kind of peaceful silence that should have been there from the beginning, and this time, Henry wasn't alone. Henry stood beside Eleanor's grave, his hands still trembling slightly, but this time, he had strength around him, not from anger, but from the silent support of the 7 Marines standing nearby. He bent down and gently placed one white rose on the soft earth. "Thank you for everything, Ellie," he whispered, "for being my strength, for walking beside me. I'll keep walking, too, just a little slower now." When he finished, he looked at Julian and the others. "I don't know how to thank you, boys." "You already did, sir," Julian replied. "You served. You showed us how to live with honor." Henry smiled softly. "That means more than medals ever did." Back near the cemetery gate, the police officers stood quietly. Officer Mercer had been pulled aside by his supervisor. There would be an investigation. Body camera footage would be reviewed. The taser use, the arrest, and the misunderstanding. All of it would be examined closely. Mercer's career had just started, but now it might be over. He had let rules matter more than compassion. He hadn't taken the time to see the man in front of him. A grieving husband, not a lawbreaker. The crowd began to leave, slowly and respectfully. Many people came up to Henry to shake his hand or thank him. Some gave him hugs. One little boy, maybe 6 years old, handed him a crayon drawing of an American flag. "My dad said you're a real hero," he said. 3 weeks later, Henry returned to the cemetery wearing his old army jacket. In his hand, he carried 7 letters, each one handwritten. He had spent days writing them, just like Eleanor used to write birthday cards, full of careful words and neat penmanship. The letters were for Julian and each of the 6 Marines who had come that day. In every letter, Henry wrote the same thing. "You didn't just help an old man. You helped him believe in honor again." The story of what happened at Maple Glen spread quickly. Local news stations covered it. Veterans groups talked about it. People across the country shared the video of the Marines walking into the cemetery in perfect formation. But to Henry, the most important thing wasn't the news or the attention. It was the reminder that what he had believed in all his life, service, kindness, standing up for what's right, still mattered. Eleanor's final gift hadn't been just her love or her last words in the hospital. Her gift was showing Henry that even in a world full of noise and mistakes, there were still good people who would stand up when it truly counted. And Henry knew that as long as there were people like those 7 Marines, this country still had something to be proud of.